Hi everybody, welcome in a new episode of the Reinvent Money Show. My name is Paul Buitink, and with me co-host Aaron van Wirdum. He's a journalist writing for Bitcoin Magazine and also Cointelegraph. His camera is not working, so we will see his blue avatar. Hi Aaron.
Hey guys.
And our guest today is Brad Scott. He's an activist, anthropologist, writer. He wrote a very interesting book, and also he wrote a lot of articles for Guardian. His book is The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance, Hacking the Future of Money. Welcome, Brad.
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you.
Let's talk a bit about you first. Can you tell us more about your background and how you've become a financial activist?
That's quite a long story, so I'll try and give a short version of it. So I come from South Africa. I studied anthropology and history and also international development, so stuff around economic development in countries, but mostly a background in anthropology and history. But then I went and worked in the financial sector for a couple of years in the world of derivatives, so swap contracts, which we can discuss if you'd like to, but as a broker. So I got some experience of the world of high finance, and then after that I started working with campaign groups and on sort of mixing together financial stuff with activist campaigns. And I wrote the book I was asked to write the book based on that, effectively.
And how long have you lived how long have you worked in the city for? Like in high finance?
I was a broker for 2 years, which is not like a massively long time to work as a broker, but it was enough to get a decent sense of what was going on. And then in terms of that ended in 2010, so that was 2008 through to 2010, right through the financial crisis. And then since 2010 to now, I've been sort of freelance, doing different projects and writing and workshops and so on.
Interesting. So you started working there already. The crisis wasn't in full swing when you started working as a broker. So you've witnessed the outbreak of the crisis and all of that.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, basically, I started working in August 2008 or September 2008, which was as Lehman Brothers collapsed. So I started working in the financial sector right in the midst of the crisis. Which was interesting, to put it mildly.
Exactly.
Especially as a broker, because brokers basically specialize in trying to match up people who are trying to buy and sell in financial markets. And in the world of derivatives, it's about these huge bets that people are taking on with each other. And in the midst of the financial crisis, that whole market imploded, and it was a bit haywire. So it was quite like an interesting time to be trying to do that job.
Yeah, but they didn't fire you during that time, because I can imagine as a junior, when you just started working there, during the crisis, that they might want to kill you or fire you, but you were still able to keep on working there.
Yeah, well, interestingly, it was actually a startup company that was venture backed. So, and part of the idea about what they thought they could do, so it was a bunch of guys from the big banks who had drifted off or been thrown out or whatever, who decided to start up their own company. And they thought that they could actually take advantage of the sort of financial crisis to do a style of brokering between big organizations that were under stress. So so they were trying to start this right in the midst of this turmoil, and it was much harder than they thought it would be. And the company went bust, I think, around 2011 or 2012. I'd left by then, but
okay. So you left the ship in time, the sinking ship, and the whole. What I read in your book is that you find it very important. That's kind of the main, maybe the key message of your book is that as an activist, it's important to understand the system you're trying to improve or you're fighting against. So you wanted to be able to understand the DNA and the code of the financial system in order to then to hack it. Could you elaborate a bit more on that theme, which is sort of the underlying theme in your book?
Yeah, sure, and it's not a particularly profound thing to say. I mean, any whether it's the financial sector or you know, the weapons industry or whatever your particular campaign or cause is, it's obviously helpful to try to get to know that industry. But unfortunately, activists, because often built into the sort of identity is a kind of rejection of the system that they're trying to fight, so they don't want to often spend time actually hanging out with bankers or going to the conferences or actually reading stuff that, you know, the banks produce. So I guess what I was sort of saying is, you know, if you're really interested in sort of challenging the financial sector, you should probably spend some time with people who work in it, or try to go and, you know, just read the Financial Times, or you could do what I do, which was, you know, actually go and work in the financial sector. But you know, there's many ways you can do that in a milder form, and I still do that nowadays. You know, I still try to spend time in your sort of, you know, mainstream scenes to sort of get a sense of what's happening and to speak to people and to take them seriously.
Right.
What do you think about the Bitcoin community in that aspect? Bitcoin community is kind of trying to hack into the world of money, right? How do you feel the Bitcoin community is approaching this subject?
Oh, I don't know. You know, I spend quite a lot of time with the Bitcoin community, but it's also partially that I'm trying to hack into the Bitcoin community itself as well. So half of my time I spend with the Bitcoin crew is like because I'm interested in Bitcoin, but then half of it is also trying to work out what's going on politically and what the dynamics of that scene are. So it's my anthropological hat on to some extent. But, you know, actually, I don't think I've got a strong enough answer for you on that. I mean, I think the Bitcoin community has quite a few different interest groups involved who have slightly different ideas. And I think what's quite interesting about the Bitcoin community is that people are kind of united based on a opposition to the sort of mainstream banking sector, but they don't necessarily have commonalities with each other beyond that. You know, you get the sort of entrepreneurs, and you get, like, you know, left-wing anarchists, you get the more sort of right-wing sort of conservative libertarians, you get people who are just curious and like technology, and they're kind of like so Bitcoin events are I find quite fun because they're sort of this weird mix of people, but also you sense that it's not entirely well, coherent necessarily, like in terms of people have different interests. Does that answer your question? But also, you know, like it's sometimes questionable in some of the financial technology scene how much it's often phrased in terms of disrupting the big banks, but you know, like a lot of people who are involved in financial technology, if they were given a choice, would accept a buyout from a bank. So you know, some people want to disrupt, others just want to make money.
Do you think this is a problem at all? Diversity?
Not necessarily. I don't know. It depends on what your objective is. I don't like hypocrisy. So it's only a problem if people are claiming to be doing something else, you know. So I don't mind if somebody wants to make cash by selling their startup to a bank, whatever, you know. But they shouldn't claim it as anything else than that.
Right.
In one of your articles, you described Bitcoin as a black knight. Could you elaborate on that?
So that article was called "A Dark Night is Better Than No Night at All." Is that right? Something like that. Which was, I'm trying to remember what my argumentation was. I was basically saying I think Bitcoin has problems if you're looking at it in a silo by itself, and you know, I mean, there's we could go into those particular problems. I mean, but also if you zoom out and you look at it in the context of the entire financial system, I'm very glad that it exists because it provides this one sort of counterpower to the normal bank payment system. And I find a lot of the critique of Bitcoin tends to not look at this. It tends to sort of focus in and say, hey, you know, Bitcoin's full of, you know, I mean, I don't know, it could be like a tax on the people involved, it could be tax on how safe it is, or the, you know, the centralization of the mining. There's a whole bunch of critiques that go like internal to Bitcoin.
Right, but they're missing the main point, or they're missing the big picture, basically.
Yeah, they're not looking at the big picture, which is like, well, compared to the existing banking system, it's not actually that bad, you know. Like, so you should sort of like have to look at it from this more strategic position, and that's what that's why I support Bitcoin a lot. Actually, is based on the fact that it's one of the very few sort of potentially scalable alternatives to the normal bank system. And it's not like I think that Bitcoin will take over somehow, but I want it to be there as an alternative.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about the banking system, because in your latest article on the Guardian, you made a lot of very interesting points. So first of all, you talk about the fact that nowadays you are almost obliged to have a bank account to participate in commerce, especially in London, but also in Amsterdam. There are more and more shops that only accept cards, and we're slowly but surely moving towards a cashless society. One of the problems there is that we are becoming almost completely dependent on the banking system. Could you maybe elaborate on that a bit more? Is that a problem, and why is that a problem?
Well, there's, I mean, I suppose it's first worth mentioning that we're quite far away from this idea of a cashless society. But as you mentioned, there are certain countries where we're sort of edging towards it. And you're right that in Amsterdam, it's becoming, you know, you'll go to shops and they say we don't accept cash. And also in Sweden, you get that kind of thing as well. And increasingly in London, you know, there's like, you know, the buses won't take cash anymore. And so there's a slow erosion of the legitimacy of cash. And basically that means that how you do payments is you have to have a bank card. Because and we can go in, if you want to talk about the sort of technicalities of how that works. I mean, basically, in order to engage in electronic payment, you have to first have an account with a bank, and a way of controlling that account, which is, you know, it could be your internet bank account, it could be your contactless card. And then you basically send messages to that bank, and you ask them to move money around for you. So you don't directly give money to somebody like at the counter of the shop. You actually ask these banks to do it on your behalf. And that basically means that there's always an intermediary to every transaction that you're doing. Now, you might not mind that if you're a person who's, I don't know, maybe this doesn't make a big difference to you, but if you're somebody on the margins of society, that could be very, very limiting. So one of the examples I use, for example, is imagine you're actually a refugee who's just arrived in a new country, and no bank wants to give you an account because you have no permanent abode and you don't have any sort of credentials. Well, that in a proper cashless society, that would mean you won't be able to engage, you won't be able to exchange, you won't be able to engage in commerce at all. You'll have to go via somebody else. So that's this idea that you would have to use banks to engage in exchange is problematic for anybody who's just a marginalized figure. And then secondly, if there's constantly an intermediary in the payments process, it also means that every transaction you engage in can potentially be watched, either by a commercial entity like a bank, or potentially by a government entity if they get certain rights to look at that data. So you can have increasing tracking of people's behavior in society, and if you can watch it, the implication that comes that you can start to censor that. So if you don't like somebody spending money on a particular thing, you can start to stop that. So you can say, we will no longer allow you to pay this person that we don't like. So, for example, we've seen it with WikiLeaks and companies like that and groups like that. But you could potentially do it for all sorts of groups.
That's why the article was called 1984, Does a Cashless Economy Make for a Surveillance State? But it ended with a question mark. It was a question. So to answer your own question, do you indeed think that we will usher into an Orwellian society when we slowly but surely move towards a cashless society?
Well, the first disclaimer I'd say is I think we're still a long way away from that. And secondly, I don't think people just lie back and accept stuff that doesn't work for them all the time. You know, I think people still, became apparent that this was a problem, you would find resistance to it. So I'm not saying there's going to be like, this is some inevitability that we'll end up with a giant financial surveillance state. But let's put it this way, the powers that be are pushing for it. So, and that includes governments and people like central banks, but it also includes the commercial sector, the banking sector, a lot of the payments companies. They make a lot of cash off this process. MasterCard, they're all pushing. So if you're in London, you see that there's this alliance between the mayor of London and MasterCard. They're running all these campaigns using big sort of celebrity figures to push this cashless, contactless payment on the London Underground. So they're in these like alliances to make it happen. And yeah, I worry about the implications of that. So in terms of like what the actual surveillance society would be, I mean, on the one hand, you have these overt abuses like, okay, we can track what you're doing. But potentially a much more important element is this idea of a panopticon, which some people might have heard of, which is if you feel that you're being watched, you start to censor your own behavior. So the ideal system of power doesn't actually necessarily require police to be out there like beating people over the head. What your ideal system of power has is when people police themselves and start to change their own behavior based on the perception that they're being watched. And that's what happens if you start to perceive that every transaction you're engaged in is being watched. You start to change the way you behave. And that's the kind of a much more subtle form of control than some kind of authoritarian state coming and like knocking on your door.
So I would like to throw in some standard arguments against this to see what you say. So the first argument would be, if I have nothing to hide, it's not a problem, right?
Yeah. Okay, so well, this argument's very pervasive, and the only sort of the quite powerful way to illustrate what's wrong with it is to say, so let's say I'm sitting in this room right now, and imagine a guy knocked on my door from, let's say, either from the government or from a big company, like Facebook, for example, like a massive, and said, hey, Brett, we're just going to install the surveillance camera in your lounge. It's got facial recognition. It's going to track you and your housemates, and we're going to basically build a database of everything you're doing in your house while you're doing it. And then I'll say, actually, that makes me feel uncomfortable. Why are you doing that? And they say, well, if you've got nothing to hide, like, why should you mind? And that's basically the argument that they're making, right? It's like, if you don't want to be watched, it must mean you're hiding something, and which is clearly crap, because people value privacy for many reasons other than they're trying to hide. People value privacy because it's important for your mental well-being to feel like you have times when you're just yourself and alone and not being watched by somebody. And anybody knows this when they like, you're at a conference and you're a bit stressed out and you go to the toilet and you're in the toilet cubicle and suddenly you feel like a little bit more, you have a little moment to relax, It's like you're just by yourself. And then you can go out and you can face the world again. People need that sense of space in order to be able to actually operate in a society. And this whole argument that if you don't want that space, you're somehow hiding something is clearly bullshit.
All right. Bitcoin in particular is used for mainly, probably, or at least a lot on the Silk Road and these sorts of dark net websites. Isn't it a good thing if Bitcoin is tracked so we can stop this sort of thing?
Bitcoin is tracked.
Well, anonymous money is mostly used for illegal purposes. At least Bitcoin is. At least for a very large part. So is that not a problem? Is that not a problem that needs fixing?
Again, if you're looking at that in a silo with no context, that argument sort of holds weight, depending on how sort of moralistic you are. But if you zoom out again and put it into the context of the broader society, it doesn't. I mean, so the first point is that we already have large parts of illegal transactions go on with cash, all right? And again, this is the trade-off that you're making when you're wanting between anonymity, which is very important for social well-being, and the fact that you have informal systems that develop when you have what's the word, like marginalized activities that occur when you have anonymity. So if you're looking at what secrecy tends to be used for, it's either for, you just want privacy for yourself, your personal well-being, or you want to because you're engaging in some kind of activity that's frowned upon by the mainstream. And that can be crime, okay? But it can also be, for example, political activity to try and change the way a system is run. And historically, that's been a very, very important pusher of progress in society, is giving people space to engage in activities that are seen to be marginal. Now, as soon as you eliminate all the abilities to do that, for example, if you have a massive push against crime and you stop all the outlets for potential to engage in crime, you also happen to simultaneously stop all the outlets for any kind of creativity and flexibility in society. Now, when you're going to make a decision, which of those do you want to prioritize? Do you want a hyper-efficient society where everything is perfect, or do you want a society that has creativity and flexibility in it? All right, and that's the kind of the way you should phrase this question. It's not like, do we want crime or not want crime? I don't know if that makes sense.
And another question here then, Brett, do you think the central bank or the government should start issuing digital anonymous currency, so state-sanctioned digital cash? I know Bank of England is talking about these things, and also in other countries there are some discussions. Do you think they should do it, and do you think they will ever do it? Because it seems kind of counterintuitive to them promoting transparency and just bank payments.
Yeah, I've never really understood this argument for why central banks would start issuing anonymous cryptocurrency. I mean, I don't see how it makes sense. The whole point of a central bank is
to collect as much as big data, to collect as much data as possible. Right?
Yeah, and look, and I'm not like necessarily always against central banks. I mean, look, these are institutions that have developed in society for various reasons. Obviously, they have lots of problems around the power dynamics of how they're controlled. But I mean, look, they're designed for a particular purpose historically in society, which is try and maintain the stability of the banking system. And that involves control, right? So you have to control things. That's part of the whole point why you have institutions. And then the question is, how much control do they have? Who gets to have a say in what's happening, et cetera, et cetera? And democratic systems are supposed to be able to control that kind of thing. But I don't see why an institution that's charged with control would start to have pushed electronic currencies that they can't control. I mean, that's
but in a way, they have to control money supply and price stability, for example. And they have been issuing normal cash money for all these centuries. So in a way, it's just modernizing their issuance of cash money.
Yeah, possibly. So I mean, if you look at the existing system of money, you have effectively two forms of money that exist. You have the actual cash in society, which is the only form of government money that we can actually hold. And then you have commercial bank money, which is partially backed by a sort of a central bank e-money, which the banks themselves have access to, but we don't have access to. And so there's two questions in this. Is like, when you're talking about central banks issuing their own cryptocurrency, are they saying that you will be able to have directly hold the commercial bank or the central bank e-money that commercial banks can right now hold? Or are they saying this is going to be like a different type of money, like a form of, just a replacement for cash that's different to what the commercial banks are doing?
I think that's the question. It's like Positive Money in the UK is trying to achieve just the first thing you mentioned, right, in a way. And in Holland you have a same movement as well, where they want citizens to be able to have 100% money at the central bank or some other government institution.
Yeah, I mean, so the basic idea would be, right now, commercial banks can have an account at the central bank, much like we have an account at the commercial bank. But so they can have an account at the central bank. Would the central bank allow citizens to have accounts with it as well? Now, that's like it kind of defeats a lot of the purpose of, the whole sort of historical alliance between central banks and commercial banks is like, look, central bank will maintain the sort of stability and stuff, and then we'll let commercial banks go and do the actual most of the money issuance with our backing, because we don't have to deal with that. And so the idea of the central bank somehow opening up its accounts to all sorts of citizens is a bit strange, and I haven't researched it enough, and I think there's been historically attempts to maybe do it, but I don't really know. It doesn't make sense to me right now.
In Ecuador, they're doing it actually. The citizens of Ecuador can open an account with the central bank directly. I mean, with modern technology, it's very easy, of course.
If you can open an account with a central bank, why would you go to a riskier commercial bank?
Well, that's another point. Do you think there needs to be a split between like commercial banks that loan out, that create money and loan out, basically have a fractional reserve, or that we should have a split where you could also have commercial banks that act as full depositories where you can store your money that's not being loaned out. So you get full reserve banks on the one hand and fractional reserve banks on the other hand. Do you think that might be a good model?
Sure. I'm not sure. I mean, have you spoken to Ben Dyson and the guys from and Fran from Positive Money?
Yeah, but they want the government to take care of that, right? You could also have in a commercial marketplace where some people store euros, some banks store euros with 100% reserve, and some other banks have a fractional reserve.
Okay.
So you can then remove deposit insurance and maybe also even other guarantees,
yeah,
and then the banks could kind of balance themselves out.
So what you're basically saying is that I, as a person, I could make a choice between, I want my account effectively to be like a vault account type thing where
Exactly.
I basically deposit money and nothing happens to it. Or I could choose another one where I get some kind of interest, which is a fractional reserve bank.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe I haven't looked at the feasibility of that. It would be interesting. But I mean, bear in mind that I wouldn't call a full reserve bank a bank at all. I mean, the art of banking historically has been, I mean, banking as we know it is fractional reserve banking. So a bank that just takes money and then just sort of like sits on it isn't really a bank. It's kind of like a storage house or something. I don't know what it is. It's not a bank though. Kind of like a fund. But yeah, I don't know. But it's look, the politics of fractional reserve banking is a massive topic, and I kind of think. I quite enjoy sometimes the New Economics Foundation in the UK, some of their takes on it, because they tend to be, well, not only them, but like looking more at the sort of, that fractional reserve banking by itself isn't necessarily a problem, provided you have proper democratic governance in the process. And that's like depends on how much you believe in the democratic system. So if you believe that people, well, do you believe that the decisions around the money supply should be in the hands of a democratic decision-making process, or do you believe it should be in the hands of technocratic sort of quasi, I mean, maybe government agents, or do you believe it should be in the hands of profit-making corporations? Now, these are all kind of have like different trade-offs to them depending on the country. I don't necessarily think that any of them are perfect. And when you're trying to design a monetary system, you really got to think about how do you balance those interests. So, like banks, when they're making loans, look, they're not just recklessly making loans for like short-term profit. They actually have to think about, is it stable? I mean, they're not completely reckless. But of course, they have systematic biases towards lending towards certain things like housing and like other financial institutions. They don't really give a shit about like a lot of things that are important in the long term. Similarly, like government politicians who, or let's think about the central bank if you think it's like a government, but like they have particular priorities which are different to the banks, which aren't necessarily positive either. And maybe like if you had under purely democratic control around money issuance, you would end up with weird anomalies as well. So, I mean, this is a bit of a roundabout answer to saying, you know, controlling the money supply is a complex issue, and you kind of want a balance of powers effectively, rather than concentration of powers.
Right. Yeah. There's no easy answer. What do you think of some of these UK initiatives? I hear myself twice. Is it? Aaron, is there?
I don't think it's here.
Okay, well, it's gone now. What do you think of the Brixton pounds and Bristol pounds? Some of these complementary currencies that we see in the UK, are they gaining any traction there? Because I read a lot about them, but it's very difficult for me as an outsider to understand whether they make a dent or whether they can actually become something big.
Okay, so these are like local currencies, and which are quite different to cryptocurrency. I mean, cryptocurrency, the whole point of it is to go supranational, so global, effectively. You know, you can have a global currency, and then the local currencies have, on the other end of the spectrum, they say let's go not supranational, let's go like really local. And interestingly, the cryptocurrency community and local currency community are sort of united in the fact that they both challenge the normal state money system, but they're different in their sort of some of the other ideologies. A lot of the local currency community is often about building small-scale collaboration, localist economics, and the Brixton pound is an example of this. You know, it's a currency that operates just in one neighborhood in London. I've historically used it quite a lot because I used to actually live in Brixton, and I know the team pretty well. And basically, it's a pretty simple system. It's effectively regulated as a voucher system. They take your money and then they issue you with a Brixton pound for it, which is technically the government considers that a voucher. And then that Brixton pound you can then spend at local businesses who will accept it. Now, one of the first critiques that sort of people from a standard economics type thinking come from is they say, this is really tiny, it's small, doesn't really do anything, doesn't really have that much effect. But part of the real point of these localist initiatives is to create a symbol of a local economy. So all small businesses in Brixton who want to show that they support the local Brixton economy will accept it. And even if they only get, like, let's say 5% of their transactions, even like 1% of their transactions, the business that they do comes in Brixton pounds, it's still a very important kind of identity marker for them to say, hey, we are trying to do this. And it's also quite important for, say, like local councillors and stuff who want to show that they support the local economy. They start to support the Brixton pound. So I'd say Brixton pound's been comparatively successful, and the Bristol pound has been based off the same idea. And they sort of jacked up their game by starting to do mobile payment. So you can go and I can pay with my phone the Brixton pound. I actually can show you the app if you want. But and it's pretty cool, you know. I've been in Brixton when I've run out of normal cash, and I can suddenly pay with my my Brixton pound app. I don't know if I can show it to you right now, but it's this. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
It's got David Bowie on it.
So they act as a sandbox where a lot of innovation can take place, and they trailblaze maybe how we can use money, and then it can be possibly adopted by mainstream players as well.
Yeah. But you know, like I would say some of the most interesting systems that I know in local currencies are actually the mutual credit systems. I don't know how much you come across these, but like I got a mate in Sardinia called Giuseppe Latera who runs a really cool one called Sardex. And his basic and Sardinia is an island, so you know it actually has quite a semi-coherent economy that you kind of map out. And he went back there after being abroad, and he realized that a lot of the big banks, big Italian banks, were ignored these small businesses in Sardinia, and they struggled to get access to credit. And then so he decided to try and start this system where he gets them to give credit to each other, and this is like a mutual credit system. So they can, the mechanics are a little more complicated than that, but basically it's a way to create almost like a collective short-term community bank system. So if you have, you want to get something but you don't currently have money, you can actually go onto the system and get it on credit, and then later you give back to the community. And then so these developed this quite interesting network of small businesses who all do business with each other now based on the system. And on the one hand, it helps them get new business. But on the other hand, it also actually develops a sense of solidarity between them. So they all start to perceive themselves as being part of the same economy, and they start to actually want to help each other, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and it gives them the sense of autonomy and independence of the global financial system, I guess. It sort of feels like they're...
And some of these alternative systems are counter-cyclical in the sense that when normal bank lending or credit starts to dry up, these things become more important. So if you're thinking about designing a resilient system that's resistant to crisis, you kind of want this mix of different players. Of course, you know, whether that works depends on the strength of the different players. I mean, let's say suddenly the banking sector starts booming and then people stop using Sardex. I mean, Giuseppe might struggle for a little while, but then suddenly when the banking sector goes down, he starts to bounce back. So there's this kind of like, you know, if your alternatives are robust enough, they can last a long time.
Yeah.
And they can be very useful in society.
Very interesting. Sardex, it's called, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's other you know, examples of these systems. But Sardex is one of the most interesting that I've seen for a while.
Well, that's maybe one for our viewers to look up. Well, thanks so much, Brad. One other important lesson I think from your book is that there is this sort of deficit amongst people about finance, about understanding how the financial world works. So it's a matter of also trying to reduce this deficit and for people to understand how it works, or maybe to participate, even like you, to work for a while in the financial industry, and work from there towards solutions. Is there any other? What's the other main lesson that you want to give away to our viewers?
Well, I mean, I'd say the best thing to do if you want to start to explore alternatives to the you know, the domineering banking system is to start just playing with the alternatives, you know. And this is what I like about Bitcoin. You know, look, I'm not like an evangelist for every aspect of Bitcoin, but I like the fact that it's different and it's new and you can mess around with it. I was in Bulgaria, in Sofia, a couple of weeks ago, and I was in a coffee shop there, and suddenly I saw they accepted Bitcoin, and I was with my wallet, my bread wallet on the phone, and I paid for three items with it, and I was like, this is so cool, you know, like it's just fun, right? You know, so the best thing to do if you want to learn about stuff is just to try out these platforms, and not only Bitcoin, try out some of the, you know, sharing economy platforms, you know, non-monetary platforms, try out the local currencies or the peer-to-peer systems. And then, you know, you don't have to actually like them. You can think that they're crap, but like that's an important lesson to learn and to be open to those and to sort of see what you like about them, what you don't like about them.
Yeah, solid advice.
If you get that in Church of Knowledge, you know, it's much better than reading a book about something. So
yeah.
I'd say.
And where can people buy your book or get your book?
I mean, you can get it on Amazon, actually. You can get it on my publisher's website, which is Pluto Press. So it's The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance, Hacking the Future of Money. Alternatively, as mentioned, there is a pirated copy floating around as a PDF. So if you don't mind reading PDF documents, which isn't always entirely pleasant, you can get it free. The key thing, though, if you take a pirated copy, it's an obligation to send it to as many people as possible, as well.
Yeah, so that's why I mentioned it.
Yeah.
I want to destroy your business, but
yeah, you know, actually, I think the problem about normal book distribution is it doesn't go to lots of countries, you know. So you distribute in Europe and stuff, but then, you know, countries, and I had a guy from Lebanon getting hold of me, being like, hey, how can I get hold of your book? And I was like, shit, you can order it from, you know, like a German site, and they're gonna charge you like 30, you know, euros of postage and stuff. So actually, I'm glad that this PDF's floating around, because it means people in countries that don't have access to those systems can get it.
Right. Well, thanks, Aaron. Maybe you got a final question for Brad.
I'm all done.
Good.
Cool. And if you, I'm Suitpossum on Twitter, which is SUITPOSSUM.
Yeah, and you will be in Amsterdam in December, right? The 3rd and the 4th of December for a conference.
Yeah. I'll actually be in Amsterdam from the 1st of December. I'll be talking at Bitcoin Wednesday, I think, on the 2nd. And then I'll be at Money Lab after that.
Oh, nice. Yeah, we should definitely meet up either on Bitcoin Wednesday or the Money Lab conference.
Sweet.
Great. Thanks so much, Brett, and good luck with all the things you're doing.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Bye.
Cheers.